Tonight's program was conceived by Helen Elkins and John Rexwaller as a way to showcase some of the island's hardworking local growers in the form of a panel discussion and to learn more about the challenges and rewards of the paths they have chosen. I'm not sure whether the challenge side of the balance sheet is going to be a lot longer than the rewards, but we'll find out shortly. 3 years ago, we had Shay Conover describe her family mussel farming operation. And I will say to this day, people tell me how much they enjoyed that program. So here we offer more of the same. John Rexwaller, with an assist from one of the island's most experienced and enduring farmers, Sandy Oliver, whom we all know and love, will moderate the panel. Before I ask them to come up and take over from here, I'll offer a reminder to consider a contribution in the range of $10 per program to help defray our expenses. And now, please join me in welcoming John and Sandy and the local growers panel.
Thank you, Gail. This is something that we've been looking forward to doing, and we got together last Tuesday evening just to have a quick run through before this evening's. And Kim arrived at our house, and I opened the door, and she came in a beautiful white dress. And I said, "It looks like you've been to a wedding. Whose was it?" And she said, "Well, actually mine." So Kim was married on Tuesday, so let's give Kim a round of applause and welcome. Kim got married on last Tuesday, and I was talking to Candace Provey, who performed the service, and Candace was telling me this evening that Kim said, "Well, okay, thank you. We'll have some champagne, we'll cut some cake, and sorry, got to go to a meeting." And off she went and came to visit us. So that was it. This is a mixture of local growers that we have here, and I'll let them go ahead and explain what it is that they do. And Anna Zlotkowski was going to join us up here, but she is taking care of some goats down there. But we may ask her to answer some questions down there anyway, because those are Anna's goats. So I'm just going to start with Kim and ask her to describe what she does, where she's located, and what she might be looking forward to. Kim, go ahead.
So I'm Kim Grindle, and I own Islesboro Oyster Company, and I have several sites. I have a 4-acre experimental kelp lease up off of Sprague's Beach on Turtle Head. I have 2 LPAs down in Riders Cove. That's my nursery site for my oysters.
What's an LPA?
An LPA is a limited purpose aquaculture permit. People in Maine are allowed to have 4 of those, and they are limited to 400 square feet each. That just is a close-up of the kelp lease. My daughter Gabby, who is not here, she's doing driver's ed. She's not here. She has 4 kelp LPAs in Seal Harbor growing just sugar kelp. And then my oyster and sea urchin LPAs are located in Broad Cove between Lobster Rock and Long Ledge.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kim. I didn't realize that you were doing sea urchins as well. I've only seen people diving in the middle of winter looking for sea urchins and getting 50 cents a sea urchin in terribly difficult conditions.
Farm-raised sea urchin is becoming a more sustainable way to produce sea urchin, and it's really beneficial to other species that are farmed.
Okay. Sandy? Yes, yes, you are.
Good.
Who are you? What do you do? Where do you come from?
Well, I have it has to be called really a micro market garden at my house, 1061 Main Road. It's the first thing that you come to just past Church Turn on the right-hand fork of Up Island, which is farther away from here than there is to here. Just want you to understand that. Takes me longer to, never mind. We sell at the farmer's market down on Church Turn at the Up Island Church. And I also sell to anybody who wants to eat that stuff that I'm growing. I take orders in the spring for seedlings, and people come to my house, or I take it to them. It's a pretty closed little operation.
All right, thank you, Sandy. Michael?
My wife and I, Pam Larson, and I have a market garden up island just a little further north of Sandy's called Growing Things. We started in, I think, technically middle of 2018. So we've been in the business for a very brief time. And we just sell to people on island in all the various ways that we can.
All right, terrific. Let me go on and say, each of you have had very different careers. I know Sandy has been in Mystic Seaport, is a food historian. Kim has done all sorts of different fun things with Lifelight. She's been working as a family manager. So she's done a lot of different things. Michael is a drummer and a sound engineer and a pianist and a musical producer, and now he's running a farm. So each of you have had very different careers. So how did you get from where you were to where you are now? Why oysters? Kim?
So my career has been pretty varied, like you said. A lot of communications and marketing work and healthcare recruiting. And I got really burned out during the pandemic. And I was already in the process of growing oysters at that point. And so I just kind of dove in and decided that was going to be my full-time job, that I was going to build a really big island-based, not big, I mean island standard big, business growing oysters. I've always loved oysters and sea urchins, and the opportunity to grow kelp is a pretty big one. It's a really flourishing industry in the U.S., so I'm excited to be a part of that.
Yeah, I was at Mystic Seaport in my very early youth, and because I was female, I was asked to start a fireplace cooking program, which I did, which introduced me to food history, which I didn't know I was interested in, but became extremely interested in. And of course, food history opens up questions about how people provision for themselves in past times. I became fascinated by people's interaction with the land or with their friends and their relatives on land, and how they filled their cellars and grew and provided for themselves. That got me interested in gardening. And so I had a garden of my own, and I fell in with some anthroposophists and learned about biodynamics, and decided that I really wanted to do market gardening. And so we moved, I was married to Jamie Macmillan. We bought a house here on Islesboro on purpose, on good land, but I also love the house a whole lot. In order to have a market garden, and we didn't do that because we found out that people here make livings doing all kinds of other things besides gardening for other people. And so and nobody used words like farmer's market or locavore or anything like that back when we were doing this. But over time, we finally did get into market gardening. And so here it is 50 years later, and I'm doing what I thought I would like to do back when I was in my 20s. And I'm also a writer, which you can do in the winter.
I hesitate to call a lot of those things you just listed as a career, but yeah, depends on how you define it. So this question was sort of funny. We were talking about it with John the other day. I actually came into this because of my wife, and she came into this out of a totally sort of random occasion, which was at Sandy's house. She had a dinner with a bunch of women, and I was not invited. And they sort of put some ideas, right? You wrote down ideas and kind of put them into some sort of container, not a hat.
Well,
was it?
I asked everybody who came to bring one good idea that would make life better on Islesboro.
There you go. And her idea was a farm. And she happened to be seated, right, next to Nancy, Alexander, she's not here, is she? No. And they said, oh, this is pretty cool. And did you hear that there's some land for sale up island right now, actually, by IIT that might actually be suitable for developing into some kind of organic garden
Yeah,
operation.
if you think a wholly, a wooded plot with big rocks and a lot of mud.
It was definitely not a farm yet, but it possessed a number of qualities that we really valued, like the fact that it hadn't been touched for over 100 years for any purpose whatsoever, had not been tainted by modern agrochemicals of any kind. So for us, it was actually quite a good starting point because we knew what we were working with and we knew how to deal with it. And we're always learning and all that. But I'm more of a problem solver and not much of a farmer in this operation, to be quite frank. And my wife is by far the most responsible for everything that happens to get planted in there, that gets harvested and sold. And I'm sorry she can't be here, but we've got people visiting for the weekend, and such is life in the summer on Islesboro.
But you had a property that was fully forested.
Yes.
And then
we went about removing all of the detritus. So that means stumps, that means blowdowns, that means standing trees, that means rocks into infinity, and putting in a well and building a road, building all the beds with compost and various amendments to, get the pH balance of the soil where it needs to be, and so on and so forth. It goes on and on and on. Building a bazillion-dollar fence that will depreciate over the next 25 years, and various structures, and bringing power in. I mean, it was just nothing. There was no infrastructure whatsoever there. And so what you see there now is what's happened in the last however many years, right? Since August of 2018. I started clearing that fall and over the winter.
it's actually remarkable. If you haven't been up to visit Pam and Michael's farm, it is remarkable what they have done there. It truly is. Sort of going back in the other direction, and Michael and then Kim, permitting. Was the choice of the property was because it was for sale, or because it was particularly good soil underneath all those trees, or because there is a soil map of Islesboro that does show some reasonable places where you should be able to grow something, but that maybe wasn't necessarily where you were. So it looks as though you've built things up from not dug down, and you've essentially built the beds up from that.
Yeah. We're in the business of building soil. So promoting soil biology is a huge part of that, amending what you've got to work with. You got to know what you're starting with, right? So testing your soil is very important. Fortunately, there'd been a lot of sort of soil analysis before we bought the land. So we knew pretty quickly what we were getting into. And we could see that we actually had a fairly decent starting point. I mean, apart from the amount of labor that went into just getting it to that point where we could start building beds. So we had a decent topsoil. There's, of course, like everywhere on the island, quite a bit of clay. But it's by no means a swamp, of which there's quite a bit on this island. And it's not just hard-packed clay. So we did have topsoil, whereas even across the road, that topsoil's gone. I mean, that disappeared in the 50s and went to Dark Harbor, to many of the gardens that you guys know now. Does that answer the question? Sorry.
No, that answers the question. It was
okay.
Just sort of, I mean, you would have less permitting. I don't know what permitting you actually required, which is very different than Kim, because Kim would be going through all kinds of permitting and local ordinances and statewide ordinances and possibly even federal ordinances that you need to follow and take care of and go through the processes. So how was that?
So the type of leases that I have right now, as I mentioned, they're LPAs. That process is not as extensive as the other types of leases. My experimental lease took many months, 9 months for me to actually get that from the state. They have a very strict, thorough process that they go through when someone applies for an aquaculture lease. And before I can even apply for any leases, I have to meet with the harbor master of the town and get approval from them first. So for Josh and Shay, their mussel lease, if I remember correctly, when she spoke, they still hadn't had a lot of the process done, and it took a really long time for the state to catch up on a lot of their licenses.
Let's bring Anna into the conversation here with goats. Maybe her mom's going to answer some questions here, but goats. My question to them all was, what's their favorite food? I want them to only like barberry and poison ivy. And so my question to Anna was, I'm going to pen them in, and I want them to eat the barberry and the poison ivy first before they eat the hosta and everything else that might be in there. And so what is their favorite food, and will they only eat barberry and poison ivy once they've eaten all the other good stuff? I mean, it's kind of like, you have to eat your vegetables before you can get dessert.
All foods are their favorite foods, even the foods that are toxic to them. They just love eating. So they just eat, and they love everything.
Wow.
But
they've got
plastic?
But
Will they eat plastic? Will they eat plastic?
I mean, probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
They're pretty reckless with
Did they when they got locked in your car? They locked themselves in the car. Just so you guys know what we're talking about.
It was Anna's car.
Yeah. Did they actually get any nibbling done in there?
Did they? They did? Oh, they busted open a plastic bag of food. They were going to the vet, and they locked her out of the car.
Yeah.
So they're pretty smart too. So I don't want to go to the vet, and there's some food in here, so here we go.
Yeah.
For Pam and Michael and Sandy, the weather this year is we came back to the island the beginning of May, and I think we had 2 or 3 days of sunshine, and the next 2 or 3 days of sunshine was maybe last week. And it's been raining since, or been raining up to then. I've never seen so much rain. We've only been here 25 years, but I've never seen that much rain on the island. It just kept going. And we live at the bottom of the hill, so I know that all of the rain comes right down and goes right by and through our house. And so, weather this year for both of you. Sandy first, maybe. What's done well? What have you had to throw away? What's bolted? I mean, what does it look like? And I know that you had an article on exactly this topic in Working Waterfront just recently. But
Yeah, I like to write about what goes on. This year has just been ghastly. And it wasn't just, the rain creates certain conditions for disease and for insects. So this was a slugfest this year. It was cold, so even if you could get a little break, or if you have relatively well-drained soil, which thank goodness I do have, it just was too cold for anything truly to thrive. And so the plants sat out there and they sulked. And then we get a little bit of sunshine, and somebody would perk up, and then a cucumber beetle would come along and bite it, and then infect it with bacterial wilt, which I've never had before. I mean, it's just been one thing after another. But the worst of the weather was the one that killed off all the peaches. And that happened back in February with that weekend that we had that was extraordinarily cold. I've never seen 16 degrees below at my house ever before, but I did this year, and the wind was blowing really, really hard. And so this spring, most of the peach blossoms in Maine were this winter that most peach trees failed to set flowers, so that it's a great loss. I'm very fond of my peaches. I like eating them, and they're something of a cash crop for me, so it was really painful. The trees came through. They had leaves this spring, so thank goodness that's in place. But
was that the same cold snap that went through Georgia?
Yeah, and took peaches out there too. Yeah, I mean, this weather is just, I call it global weirding, because it isn't just warming, it's just weird all the time. But the lettuce lettuce did pretty well. Yeah, the lettuce did well.
And then the slugs came and ate the lettuce.
Yeah, then the slugs ate. Well, they ate the lettuce that the Japanese beetle grubs didn't get.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in her garden. But yeah, the slugs have been having an incredible party at our place. It's very difficult to get a head of lettuce that hasn't been nibbled on throughout right now. And I should also I'm not going to repeat what Sandy said. Everything that she said is true for us except for the peaches, because we don't have peach trees. We do happen to have plums growing on our plum trees, which I'm very excited about. We'll see how that happens. That'll be the first year that we've actually had fruit on those trees.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Watch out for Coculio.
So those trees actually were, many of you remember him, Jim Roberts actually helped to kind of pick those trees with us shortly before he died. And so that row of 10 plum trees is, we did that sort of with Jim, for Jim. So psyched to see how those produce over time. But one thing that I learned from my father's side of the family, which has been farming in Missouri for well over a century, is the weather never does what you want it to do. A good farmer will always complain about the weather, but they will also be able to pivot. And it's a lot harder to do when you're farming or growing organically. You have a lot more variables, and you're fighting a lot more pests, especially. And yeah, it's been exceptionally hard this year, just because of what Sandy said.
Yeah, every morning begins with a look at the forecast for the day, for the week. And I don't, I plan everything around that I possibly can. It's just the only way to go.
Do you introduce other organisms to combat the pests that you have?
I like hand-to-hand combat myself.
So is that you picking slugs off? Is that the combating the pests?
Yeah, we go after them by hand. We're having the best fun right now with Japanese beetle. We're knocking them into jars with detergent and water in it and watching them drown.
I've discovered something that actually works very well is to have a couple of grandchildren out there, teach them that Japanese beetles are not that bad, and what you really need to do is to give them a bath. And so they get picked off and they put into soapy water, and they have a great time wandering through the Rosa Rugosa doing that.
So
yeah.
You could rent out your grandchildren the way
yeah,
she's
actually,
gonna rent
that's
goats.
a thought. Yeah, I could rent them out.
Yeah, depending on the price, we'd be interested.
Something else, Kim, that your family is doing is Gabby has decided, this is Kim's rising sophomore, and Gabby has decided that she likes kelp and wants to grow kelp, which I think is something that again is this global warming. Lobsters moving north can kelp survive slightly warmer waters. Is that a reason that you're doing it? So.
I would say that the main reason she started was because a lot of her friends that she had met through me was growing kelp, and she saw it and thought, this is a really easy way to make money. It's not an easy way to make money at all. But with global warming, we have since learned that kelp absorbs a tremendous amount of carbon, and it grows very, very fast. And so in addition to, helping ocean acidification in those ways, it's also very nutritious for us. So she's actually become really into the kelp movement, if you will.
And is that's obviously it's not rockweed. It's not what we do. It's something else. It's long, thin, flat strands of kelp.
There's some photos.
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
If you
Okay.
Yeah,
skip
cue me
through,
up. Next slide.
keep going. Yeah, I'll just tell you when to stop. Keep going. So that's seeding. That's a colleague of mine. That's how the kelp starts. It's just on string, and you string it onto some rope. You can go, Michael. That was the day of our harvest, our first harvest. So that's what the kelp looks like coming up out of the water. That's a group photo of us. Gabby's in the middle next to me. She set hers late. She didn't have her licenses from the state until January. Typically, you start in October. So she was behind, but she managed to grow almost 1,000 pounds on the 1,200 feet that she set out. We've increased my 4 acres and her LPAs combined is around 11,000 linear feet. So that's a lot of.
Could you talk
Right.
a bit about the way in which it's sold? Do you process it, dry it? Could you talk about that part of it?
Absolutely. So this is, there's a lot of food companies that are making kelp-based products. The company that we sold to last year sold a majority of their kelp to Patagonia, the clothing company, because they have a provisions line, and they were making a kelp bar similar to a protein bar. And the other one was a bread manufacturer that uses, I don't know the name of the company, that uses kelp in their breads. And so there's a lot of seaweed salads, seaweed burgers, there's chips, there's a variety of food products. So we cut it into big bags, and this was us unloading them at the ferry. We put them in those big square fish totes, and they were sent to the mainland to the buyer in Portland, who then processes it there. They use a lobster processing plant. They've partnered with a lobster wholesaler, which is really great, and they do all the processing there.
Any thoughts on sargasso weed? Sargasso weed in the Caribbean is a huge problem. Can you process that the same way? Can that be eaten, or is it toxic? Any ideas on that?
May through October, it's very toxic. It's a very beneficial marine habitat to fish, sea turtles, all kinds of things. It's the big patches of sargassum around the globe is a nursery habitat for mahi-mahi. It's vital to that species. And it can be harvested for livestock feed, some other things. I'm not very knowledgeable in it, but I just know the basic info. And there's a biofuel component to sargassum. It's being harvested out of the ocean in mass quantities to be processed for ethanol.
Yeah, I think they're making bricks out of it.
There's all kinds of
Yeah.
things.
And also, I just wanted to add, because this is relevant to us as well, I think, right, Sandy? Are you using kelp meal?
No, I just
Okay.
use a mushed up mix of that kind of thing, plus
Yeah.
lobster waste. It's called sea mix, and it really smells.
Yeah, nice.
But plants love it.
Yeah. So we use quite a bit of kelp meal when we put our seedlings, our transplants in the ground, as part of that process.
Is that kelp or rockweed?
Yeah.
Just
No, it's kelp.
It's
Yeah.
the kelp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Absolutely.
will say that the livestock industry is really getting into the use of farm-raised kelp. These animals over here love kelp as a supplement.
I'm going to sort of take it up a few levels here. Sandy, what sort of new discoveries or have you made over your career, or what things have sort of surprised you didn't think in your 20s in Mystic or subsequently that you didn't think you'd ever see maybe in your lifetime, and it's happened?
Electronics. But I think the thing that has been the most striking for me most recently was my realization late last summer that about PFAS. This is the forever chemicals that existed so much of the environment and in yours and my bodies right now. In Maine, of course, a great many farms used sludge from municipal waste companies to fertilize the fields. And it was a wonderful and expensive way for farmers to fertilize. And it has ruined an awful lot of land in Maine. And that affected me because we don't have a lot of hay fields on Islesboro where we're making the big round bales or even square ones that I like to buy to use as mulch. I love mulch, hay. I use wood chips in my paths now, and I'm trying to figure out what to use in place of mulch hay. And it's just, it's changed everything. It changes every way I think about my garden now. I look at my beds entirely differently. I'm thinking about cover cropping, how, dense cover cropping, tarping over that, planting through the dead cover crop, thinking about agricultural paper, densely planted beds so that they're constantly covering the soil, weeding. It's just turned everything upside down. And, who ever heard of PFAS when I was 27? Maybe the people making it, I don't know, but not me.
Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, PFAS is a mess. And you can still buy this stuff, by the way, at Home Depot and Lowe's and a lot of big box stores. They sell it by the bag. I think they call it like bio green something or other. I mean, it's branded as like some sort of miracle fertilizer to put on your yard or in your garden. FDA approved or whatever it is. Yeah, EPA approved. Surprising discoveries you've made over your career. The fact that I'm engaged in an agricultural enterprise, that's probably the biggest surprise to me. I grew up in Missouri. My father's family has been farming out there, like I said earlier, for quite some time. And I never anticipated actually doing anything like this, but here I am. And I'm actually quite happy. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be engaged doing this sort of stuff. And I'll tell you, it's a little more rewarding than like playing a crummy bar show for 4 people in the middle of Montana. It can be demoralizing night after night. So it's nice to be able to kind of see the positive impact that one can make in a community like this. So,
well, I think
anyway,
the produce that Pam and Michael and Sandy deliver to the island is always appreciated. I mean, it's just the salads that Pam and Michael have been making recently are just amazing, just incredible. All sorts of fun stuff in there, and we let them know, and you should buy them and let them know that it's appreciated. I'm going to move on a little bit to again very general questions. What's the hardest part of what you do, Sandy? Picking slugs, no?
Just deciding what to do. I stand out in the garden and I look at this stuff and think, okay, how am I going to do that now? And I scurry off to the internet to see what advice I can get from various sources. And then the other thing is always, I'm 76 for heaven's sakes. And it's just, a lot, and I'm not, I haven't had my hip replaced or anything, but so sometimes just, going out there and turning a compost pile is the hardest thing I can do. And it takes me a lot longer than it used to. And finding help and training I have helpers from Worldwide Opportunities in Organic Farming, or WOOF, and I have woofers who come and live at my house. And they come from every walk of life that you can imagine, every level of capability. And so getting them up to speed so they can be helpful is pretty challenging some days. Yeah.
Kim, what's the hardest thing that you do?
I think that I have discovered the hardest part changes each year. There's always something each year that's like just the hardest. this summer has been boat issues. But overall, I would also add that one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with is a few kind of not in my backyard people. People tend to look at aquaculture vastly differently than they do traditional agriculture on land. And I'm really passionate about Maine aquaculture and what I'm doing. I really believe in it. And so it's been really difficult. It's been a really hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, that's fair. Michael?
I can think of a lot of funny things to say. I'm trying to be more sincere. What's that?
Keeping Pam happy.
Yeah, it's like, running a business with your spouse is probably the hardest thing I do. Outside of that, I don't, I'm pretty fortunate on my end of responsibilities in what we do. I think Pam is doing, and our crew, Lucy and Grace and Nadia this year, those guys are really, really working physically hard every day. And putting in 12-hour days easily. I'm putting in work as well, but those guys are really bearing the brunt of the physicality of the process. And Pam's doing a tremendous amount of research, continuing ed stuff. In wintertime, she's taking college-level courses in soil science, in organic gardening, in cut flowers. And then the amount of planning that she's putting in the off season, selecting all the seeds, everything that we're going to be planting in the following year, mapping that out is insane. I know there are a lot of people in this room who are very familiar with databases, and I will tell you, the databases that Pam has built this year and the girls have helped to contribute to are bonkers. And it's, they can understand it. I can't understand it, to be honest, but it's working, which is great. So we always have things ready to go on the ground. Stuff is being harvested, and then things are coming along behind. So, we never have empty beds, which is the real goal for us. So anyway, sorry.
Empty beds is probably the goal of a lot of these people, too.
Right.
Grandchildren.
Yeah.
How many grandchildren?
Yeah.
John, can I answer that question for Anna as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the hardest things with having farm animals that we have encountered is lack of livestock veterinary care. That's been difficult. So we've had to, Anna wants to be a vet. I also went to college for animal vet sciences. And so we've actually had to absorb a lot of that. And as Sandy was mentioning, the PFAS, a lot of the hay in Maine has been very affected by that. And so a lot of the hay now, really, people are finding you can't feed high performance animals.
Yeah, you wouldn't think of that sort of connection, and it's PFAS is you can't plant something in that field and you have to leave it alone. But then the ramifications of what might have been grown there and is now spreading and being EPA approved, and everybody would think it would be okay. Slightly different question. What would it take to feed more people? Just two more questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. What would it take to feed more people on this island?
Well, the late, great Russell Libby, who headed MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, for years, said Islesboro needs 15 acres dedicated to vegetables to take care of our average size population. So we need 15 acres fenced, because without fencing, you might as well just, you know what will happen. So, and we also could use some more livestock raising out here to help feed us, and also to provide manure for composting and for putting on gardens. It's valuable, wonderful stuff, and we don't have nearly enough of it. In fact, do we have any?
Just horse
horse.
For the most part,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think we can hook you up with some
And
goat
there's
manure.
yeah, there's a
well, yeah,
lot of bedding. Yeah, the like private riding, you know.
Oh, yeah, they do, but
There's a
they-
huge amount of bedding in
Yeah,
that
the
manure,
bedding
so
in it
you know
just
it's not like
Yeah,
straight manure.
no.
Yeah.
We like the straight stuff.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, you know, for example, we eat a tremendous number of eggs on this island. It's really extraordinary. But I would bet that if we put up a big old hen house and raised enough eggs to do that, there might be some more complaints about, you know, animal husbandry out here. So it would probably be good to have a right to farm law, or at least a right to farm ordinance, so that we could have, we could expand those kinds of operations, which are, you know, by nature a little on the smelly side.
When we first embarked upon our land acquisition and thinking about what we were actually going to do before we did it, we did some research about laying hens. At the time, in 2018, the break-even point for laying hens was 400 birds. Now, I don't know, I know my dad knows about this, but I don't know if any of you all have ever had to own property near a livestock operation, period. But next to a chicken operation is like Abu Ghraib. It is the worst smell ever. And I think that would be a really tough sell on Islesboro. I think there are probably other things that, you know, people would like to have next to their house. Doesn't mean you can't have chickens in your yard, you know, but a, you know, commercial hen operation is,
Depends on
that's
how
a
far
tough
your
one.
chickens wander,
Yeah, and how many eagles eat them, or mink,
Or mink.
or
Yeah.
the neighbors do.
or the neighbors. Yeah.
Last question, closing question. Kim, what's the most satisfying part of what you do?
I think that the most satisfying thing I've discovered is actually two things. The excitement that people have when they have become your customer and have eaten your food and come back. And that was not a component that I really thought of, but I have a lot of really loyal customers, and just feeding people, even if it is just oysters, has been really great. And the environmental benefits.
What do you mean, just oysters? Putting good, clean food in people's mouths, there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And also to be doing something, I think in the long term, I mean, 25 years down the road, we hope to have made a somewhat a positive impact here. Not only as being a source of employment, a source of healthy food for people, seasonal and year-round, but also being a model in various ways, not only for, you know, you can have an organic garden and grow your own food, but other things, you know, educational opportunities. We try to work with IIT and teaching young people and not so young people about various garden-related things and all that. It's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, I think that's that's very valid, and that's what a lot of people on this island are doing, and you're doing it for your fellow islanders, and it's a small community, and it is very rewarding, particularly to have people come back like me to say your salads are great. I've eaten Kim's oysters; they're terrific. It's a very rewarding thing, and that's why, quite honestly, I wanted to have this particular forum, is to present to you people who believe in what they're doing in this island, in what they do, and to try and showcase that to the community. So with that, let me take questions. Jan.
I have a two-part question. Actually, one is a comment. Last fall, because I stayed into the fall season, you had a fabulous fall harvest area out by the Blueberry Preserve. And you had the oysters, you had the tomatoes, you had the lettuce. It was just wonderful, because it was a great opportunity to sample all of the things that you have, and not everybody knows about. So it's a good way to showcase what you do. My question to Caitlin was, when you collect the kelp, do you do anything in terms of processing it before you put it in the totes, or do you just collect it and put it in the totes, one? And two, have you had any vandalism of your ropes?
So what we do is it's cut off the line, and to keep it cold, fresh water would actually burn the kelp. So we freeze jugs of water and kind of layer the jugs in, and those totes are very insulated. And so that's all we do. And as far as vandalism, yes, I have had vandalism.
There's no way to identify who's doing it, but it's part of not in my backyard, is that?
I don't know.
Yeah, the gentleman on the edge on the edge of the road. Yes, yes, sir. You.
A question for Kim. You said that your leases are a certain amount of territory. Are the bays platted, or do they send a surveyor out with a bunch of change areas? How do you determine where it is, and how do you determine how you respond if the guy with the next lease decides you've encroached on it?
So all the states are different. Maine, I'm going to compare Maine and Florida. So in Florida, they have pre-planned oyster parcels, and you have to apply for those already approved areas. In Maine, it's different in that you can, or one can go and you apply for an area that you think you want to farm. And so with the LPAs, that's why it's really useful to have that type of permit, is because they're small, so you can try them out in different areas, and they're not as expensive. It's $100 fee per year per LPA compared to a standard lease that has a yearly fee per acre. You have to have at least $5,000 in escrow, and the application fee, I think, is like $1,500. And so you just kind of, for me, I used where I thought there was good water temperature, good currents, it was out of the way of lobstermen, and just low traffic areas.
Houston?
Got two, so one for Kim and then one for the other two. So for the Kim, I just wanted to follow up on, you said you had NIMBYism, and I've seen your, the ones out in near Broad Ridge, I guess,
Broad
yeah.
Cove.
And I've seen other people, like Warren Island and other things around. I mean, what's to be upset about? I mean, they're just floats out there. So what's that about? And then for the other two, I just want to know what you produce, since I don't, I probably eat some of Michael's stuff that Helen's got.
Definitely.
I would say that the NIMBY attitude that I've experienced is so with LPAs, that's a very limited income source, because 400 square feet lines, having 4 of those, that's not a lot of space. I want to build a business, be able to employ people, my children work for me. So when I started in aquaculture, it was always my plan to expand. And I think that that's a really scary piece for some people, because when you talk about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, how many ever acres on the ocean, that's a different, even though it's the same on land, it kind of, people think of it differently. So I think maybe that's just maybe fear, and they don't want to see a lot of gear. I don't know.
For you two, what do you produce?
What do you produce, Sandy?
What do I produce? All the usual vegetables, things like lettuce and green beans, garlic, squashes of various sorts. I don't know, all that green stuff.
Really
Yeah.
good pickles.
And I make good pickles too.
Yeah, she's being very humble. Actually, she's actually a real wizard with preserving and pickling and canning, and making delicious sweet things, and also savory things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's pretty, yeah, I guess that's true. People seem to like that stuff.
Yeah,
And,
they
you know, I
definitely
really like
do.
making it. Value added is a one way to make a small operation like mine matter as far as the household budget is concerned. So, but of course it means you get to grow the stuff and then you get to do something with it again. So, but it's also one of the more fun things. And it tells me, by doing this myself, I know what people can do with the produce that they buy from me. So if somebody, picks up something, I can say, you want to know how to cook that? Can I give you some advice on that? Sometimes when you get funny looking vegetables, people will look at this, so yeah, I can help with that, how to cook it. I give away recipes when I sell some of my vegetables.
And Sandy is at the Up Island Farmers Market, which is Sundays at the church on Church Turn, the Up Island Church, 1 to 3 on Sundays. Meg?
First of all, she also writes incredible cookbooks.
Yes, true.
Which actually we used the other night for a crumble, and it was your apple crumble recipe that we used rhubarb instead of apples, and it was a magnificent rhubarb crumble.
That's one of my best recipes ever, because the topping can go on rhubarb, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, peaches. Yeah.
So my question is, I'm concerned about the horse hay and all of that. I grew up on a farm and we had all kinds of livestock, including horses, and my father made prize-winning alfalfa. You have a lot of Amish people in this state. Are they growing on this awful soil? And I also need that actual name so I can see the poison in the things that I buy. I'm not sure what you're calling those lifelong chemicals.
Forever chemicals? Yeah. PFAS. It's an acronym, PFAS.
Even with, if somebody could find good land, there's no reason why it's a wonderful crop to grow. I would love to see more open space in this island anyway, so I don't know whether any farmer type would ever be interested in farming hay here.
Yeah, it's a tough business to try to get into and make any money on a small scale, which is what we're talking about here. But on a subsistence level, you certainly could if you had the right land. And there is some land out here that could actually be used for haying. But the good news is on Islesboro, no one has actually spread this sludge. And all of the state of Maine has basically been mapped, because you had to pull permits to actually spread this stuff. So they know where the sludge was spread. And unfortunately, a lot of it is on hay fields. Yeah.
You can plant orchards on fields that have been spread with PFAS, because apparently apple trees do not convey those chemicals into the fruit. So that is one way around what other farmers could do. The other thing I wanted to say about farming and costs and all is that MOFCA has done a little study on this, and they've basically discovered that there's almost no farm, a general farm like the kind market gardens, that are not subsidized in some fashion. A farmer might have a wife who teaches in the school, or vice versa. And there's benefits in a year round. There's a salary plus benefits accrue to the family. My little operation is subsidized by Social Security. So there always has to be something else to support this. That's why vegetables coming from the West, where we're busy drinking California's water on our salad plates, but they can do this over acres and acres and acres, and it's a big business, and so our small operations are not efficient financially.
Just one more question. Philip had your hand up there, so just one more question and then we'll close.
I'm interested by the benefits of growing oysters and kelp and cleaning up the water, actually capturing carbon dioxide and things like that. On the other side are the salmon farms, which are just pervasive. I know there's been chatter about a salmon farm in Penobscot Bay and all of that. I was wondering if you could speak to that, and is there a way to do that in a way that not only doesn't harm the wild salmon, which I know we're trying to introduce, but also doesn't tank the general health of the bay, all that stuff?
I am not comfortable speaking to that. Fish farms and land-based aquaculture is a whole different ballgame. It's vastly different. It's very complex, and it's just nothing that I really have experience in.
Monoculture is always a bad idea.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, that seems to be a concluding note. Thank you to the panelists, Kim, Sandy, Michael, and to Anna and to Glory and Ellie over there as well. They didn't have anything to say this evening, but they were certainly there. Their presence was felt. Thanks very much indeed for your attendance, and I'll pass it back to Gail.
Thank you very much, panel and moderator John. What I've learned is that a common denominator of our local growers is dry, self-deprecating wit. You all have it in large measure, and we are so impressed and so grateful for the fine food that you bring us. So, John, you said it brilliantly, and I echo that. I hope all of you will give their products a try at the farmers markets, the two of them that we have. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'd like to say a word about next week's program. On almost everyone's lips these days are the words generative artificial intelligence. And our speaker is the director of the Center for Artificial Intelligence at Colby College. Her name is Amanda Stenta, and I think she will bring a very, very interesting program and informative set of information for us. So I encourage you to come hear Amanda Stenta next week.